I've been asked this afternoon to speak about memory and tradition in Asian theatre. And Asian theatre is too big an area, and nobody can claim to have knowledge or even information about all the theatres of Asia. But there are certain things, certain themes running right through all Asian theatres in the 20th century. And we see striking parallels between cultures. Widely different cultures, yes, widely different cultures, and widely different languages. What are they? Before I talk about the strategies of negotiating with memory and tradition in Asian theatre, there is something that is common to most of these Asian theatres. And this is the experience of colonialism. And what colonialism does to colonies is to erase memory. The moment the colonial knowledge system is imposed on the natives, a lot of local knowledges, local sciences, and a lot of wisdom and a lot of art and creativity, which is preserved and transmitted orally, that takes a backseat because writing becomes important. So the culture of logos, the theatre of logos, becomes very important, and this happened in all the colonies. And some literary historians like Ganesh Devi have called this phenomenon amnesia. Colonialism brings about amnesia among natives. They forget their own traditions, their own inherited knowledge. And to make up for the loss of this memory, one of the strategies adopted is to visualize the past in terms of traditions. For example, in India, there were many traditions of theatre. Now, these days, when many Indologists and many even Indian theatre scholars talk about theatre, they mention mostly the classical tradition of Natya Shastra, but that was only one of the traditions. There were many other traditions in India. For example, in the Northeast, there were different kinds of traditions. In Manipur, for example, there was a tradition of performance which is entirely different and independent from the Natya Shastra tradition. And our South Indian traditions have their own genealogies. So there are so many forms of theatres prevalent in the subcontinent, and these were made subsidiary in the colonized worldview to what the West understood to be drama and theatre. For example, our literary historians were trying to admit very painfully, sometimes guiltily, that look, we don't have a tradition of drama in our country, in our languages. And there was a great tradition, classical tradition in India, Sanskrit tradition, which produced Kalidasa and others. And after that, there was no playwriting in India. And this playwriting came back to our languages only thanks to European influence. This was far from the case because the kind of theatre which depends on a written play was something that is new even in the West. And this came only after around the Elizabethan age in England, because before that there were lots of other kind of theatres. In Europe also, in India, the multiplicity of theatrical traditions coexisted. They had not been, so some of them have been marginalized. They were not wiped out. They were existing. So all that variety disappeared. So how to write a play? So Shakespeare is the greatest playwright. So many Indian theatre scholars started asking the question, who is the Shakespeare of India? Yes, Kalidas is the Shakespeare of India. But nobody asked the question, who is the Kalidas of England? So this is how we try to recreate our tradition, re-visualize, reimagine our tradition as a mirror image of Western tradition. This is what happens in colonial contact, as Ami Caesar has said in his great book, Discourse on Colonialism, and Albert Memmi has argued in his famous book, The Colonized and the Colonized, but the relationship between the colonizer and the colonized can never be a normal relationship. It's always filled with guilt and shame, sometimes with guilt, sometimes with shame. So it cannot be a normal interaction. So this became the origin of what is called modern drama all over the Asia. I'm talking particularly about India, but some of these things apply too. Of course, there are some regional specificities. For example, in Sri Lanka, modern theatre originated only in the 19th century, because Theravada Buddhism was not in favor of theatre, because in the Tripitakas, Lord Buddha it says that theatre is taboo theatre, because this is an obstacle to the attainment of Nibbana and to the end of dukkha. Because theatre it fuels one's sensual desires. So Buddhism, it was taboo, like in some Islamic civilizations. So except such regional specificities, one thing that is common to all modern the Asian theatres is how to reimagine our theatre in the image of European theatre. And when this was happening, they forgot that the tide would be turned very soon. So when they discovered modern theatre, created modern drama and theatre for India, it was based on European realistic traditions. Very soon, when modernism came to European theatre, a lot of Asian influences, they traveled to Europe. For example, in the 70s, Bertolt Brecht became a major influence on Indian theatres. But where did the epic theatre became the buzzword in those days? But how did epic theatre come into being? Epic theatre itself was a response, Brechtian response, to the Chinese opera, which Bertolt Brecht watched in Moscow. So this theatre, he found it so different from Aristotelian theatre, and he thought that this would suit his purpose as a revolutionary theatre, and so he evolved the concept of epic theatre, which he later called dialectical theatre. But in the 70s, Brecht becomes a buzzword in India, forgetting that Brechtian concept of theatre, or epic theatre, was itself derived from Asia. And in the West, a lot of the theatre virtuosos like Grotowski, for example, and several others, Otto, and so many of them, they were very deeply influenced by Asian theatres. For example, the William Butler Yeats, who was a great Irish poet and also a playwright, he was very deeply influenced by Japanese no theatre. Now we had rich theatrical traditions, some of them highly textualized. For example, in India, we had Natya Shastra tradition, highly stylized. In Japan, for example, they had No and Kabuki, highly stylized theatres. There were lots of other folk theatres. In India, for example, we had, in South India, we had Yakshagana, and in North India, we had different forms of Chow, Purulia Chow, and Saraikela Chow, and Nautanki, and Ram Leela, Krishan Leela. So many forms of theatre which were very different from Western theatre. Some of them were community theatres. For example, he wrote a book on Ram Leela theatre of, Varanasi, and which is one of the forms of popular theatre in North India. And Richard Sheckman, it was Richard Sheckman who wrote this book, and he called it environmental theatre. And some Indian directors started imitating Richard Sheckman's environmental theatre, which was in itself was an imitation of two of the non-European theatres. One is Ram Leela of Ramgarh near Varanasi, and there is Christian miracle theatre of Indian communities in Arizona. So in fact, the influence that was happening between East and the West was in a kind of dialogic nature, but well, the way these influences were received in creating new traditions or presenting the old traditions was on Western terms, and this has problem has dogged both the conceptualization and our analysis of our own theatre situation. Peter Brook, for example, is another important European director, British director, who did his famous production of Mahabharata. He was deeply influenced by many Indian forms of theatre, but this again, he becomes the big influence in India. So the biggest challenge, and drama schools, for example, are trying to do things. I mean, there were national drama schools in Korea, for example, in Japan, and in India. What they're doing is, number one, they're trying to, model the theatre training along the lines of Eurocentric theatre, and they're also doing the opposite, trying to revive old traditions. For example, if you look at the history of Indian drama schools, National School of Drama was first, it was the first director of National School of Drama was Ibrahim Al-Qazi, who was trained in the Royal School of Dramatic Arts, Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in London, and he modeled the syllabus and the pedagogy of National School of Drama along the lines of that dramatic school in London. And the next director, B.V. Karan, who was supposed to be a traditionalist, who came from Yakshagana background, what he did was he wanted to bring in traditions into modern theatre, within the framework of modern theatre, to bring in traditional forms. See, traditional theatres were practices, they were cultures, they were not forms. They were closely related to a way of life, sometimes to a community, sometimes to so many other cultural factors. And these people were trying to extract this out of the rest of the culture and try to revive as a kind of a spice to add to modern theatre. So this was again within the same terms which were imposed on us, framework of the terms imposed on us by colonialism. So it was a kind of unequal exchange. But what is the hope for Asian theatre? If I look at India, there were some attempts to go beyond these paradigms of unequal exchange between the hegemonic theatres of the West and Indian theatres or regional theatres. One example that springs to my mind is a theatre of Habib Tanveer. Habib Tanveer, who came from the background of the progressive theatre, which was deeply influenced by Marxism and which believed in the theatre of socialist realism. For example, two important Western influences of modern theatre was one of them was the critical realism, which is represented by Ibsen and Strindberg and others, Banashaw and others. The other is socialist realism, which was those theorists like Maxim Gorky and who were influenced by socialist ideology. So drama school theatre has developed along the lines of Western liberal modernist tradition, whereas some of the people's theatres, progressive theatres, developed along the lines of socialist theatres influenced by socialism, particularly the Russian model of theatre. Stanislavski, for example, who also believed in the kind of what is common to both critical realism and socialist realism, is a realistic approach to theatre. For example, what is represented on stage should be very lifelike. And for example, Stanislavski wanted to do Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. He took his actors to Rome so that they could feel and imbibe the spirit of Rome to breathe life into the characters. When he came back, somebody told him that Shakespeare had never been to Rome. Shakespeare had only imagined Rome. So this is the tragedy of realism. However lifelike you may try to make theatre, it more unlifelike it becomes. But realism, both critical realism and socialism, were predetermined by this kind of firm belief in realism as reality. But luckily for them, or unfortunately for them, new developments happened in Europe in the form of expressionism, theatre of the absurd, theatre of cruelty, epic theatre, and so on, theatre of the oppressed, later which developed in Brazil, which was a reaction against the realistic Aristotelian model of theatre that initiated modernization of theatre in Asian countries. But the point is, when these theatrical forms, which were originally influenced by Asian theatres, came to these countries, they were filtered through the ideological framework of Eurocentric worldviews, and they were just forms for them. For example, the D.V. Karan, the great Indian theatre director, was the second director of National School of Drama. When they did Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, uses the Ekshagana form. The form has no inherent relationship with the content of the play. There are other attempts in Indian theatre, and I hope similar trends must be there in Asian theatre. Like I'm talking about Habib Tanveer, he also went to London, and he discovered that though in spite of his training in Marxism and socialist theatre, he said this is not the theatre that our villagers understand. So he went back to India. He went to Chhattisgarh area and he started working with local tribal people, Chhattisgarh tribals, and developed a new kind of theatre. He set up a troupe called Naya Theatre, uh, which is of course socialist in content, but it was a very authentic kind of theatre, and he was not using any folk form. When he was asked, why do you use folk forms in here? He said, I never use folk forms. I'm working with folk artists. These are my actors, and these folk theatrical skills are are present in their bodies. This is how they can do theater best. So I use their talent. So this was one attempt which I can see to develop an authentic Indian theatre, which is different from traditional theatre, because we can't live with traditional theatre. Traditional theatre, whether classical or folk, represents a certain kind of formal perfection. It is there as a museum piece, that's fine, but the thing is, it is not the living theatre. It can be preserved as a monument, it's not the living theatre. Because after modern theatre came into being, traditional theatre, for the most part, stopped responding to contemporary situation. So it's become a kind of a museum piece. So the problem of traditional theatre is just repetition. The problem of modern theatre is a kind of ruthlessness. It is based on directorial interpretation of theatre. So another great director from India, from Manipur, Kälam, he developed a new kind of theatre called Theatre of the Earth. Not on the basis of classical Indian theatre, which many theatre pundits thought that it was the only source of traditional India, but in close dialogue with his own native Manipuri theatrical forms called La Haroba, Sankirtan, etc. He imbibed this grammar and created a new theatre language which could represent and which can embody, critique, and resonate with the present. And there's a kind of theatre which does not depend too much on the text, but there is a lot of poetry in this theatre, because the poetry of theatre is different from the poetry of from dramatic poetry, for instance. So what is common to both Habib Tanvir and Kanailal is that they turned their back on the so-called modern theatre, which came to us from the West due to the influence of liberal political ideology or with the socialist ideology. They respond closely, interact closely with their own situation, and create a new theatrical form of communication. It's not a theatrical form for them, it's a kind of theatrical communication. And it's rooted, but at the same time, if not universal, it has a trans-regional kind of appeal, because these productions work elsewhere also, because theatre can be universal only when international, only when it is national and regional. Now the point is, a lot of modern theatre wants to become national without being regional, international without being national. So there are authentic and inauthentic ways of dealing with this amnesia and the tradition in different areas of Asian cultures, which is also reflected in theatre. Now, one problem that dogs our theatres in Asia today is, according to me, one is a kind of state-sponsored theatre, government-funded theatre, which can only lead to formal perfection, which cannot lead to any kind of innovation in theater. Uh, Secondly, there is this the uh, theater which depends on funding these days, more and more corporate funding. In this context, theater becomes a commodity which post-capitalism turns every cultural artifact into a commodity. So theater becomes commodified in this context, and both of them lead to inauthentic kinds of theaters. But genuine theater today, a theater which represents the spirit of the people and which is more than a kind of entertainment, more than a kind of showpiece, but a deep communication with the community and with the environment. That kind of theater has to exist outside these two spaces of government-funded theater or the other kinds of corporate-funded theaters. So theater is a threatened space of culture, and one has to struggle to create it. And neither Habib Tanvir nor Kanai Lal were able to make theatre into a business. They could just survive. The economic basis of this theatre was precarious. And after all, modernism, true modernism, whether in Europe or in India, is the art of the precarious, and it's a threatened art. And this kind of the angst, this kind of anxiety is necessary to create something new, which is forgotten by the post-structuralist, postmodern ideologies, which are now dominating our understanding of theatre. So there is a need to renegotiate a relationship with the past in theatre as in any other area. And the purpose is not just to go back to the past or in the hope that past can be brought back to the present, to learn from the past, to find out whether our past had languages, worldviews which are different from what we have inherited from our education, which is mostly shaped by Eurocentric values. This is a challenge which not many people are addressing themselves, so because it's easy to fit into either this state-funded theatre model or corporate-funded theatre model, and because theatre today has to achieve something that cinema does not do, because the immediacy of theatre is not possible for cinema, although cinema is a much more form-based, a lot more technology than theatre. Of course, a lot of corporate theatre is also moving towards a lot of technology, and the more it becomes technology, the less of art it becomes. There is a certain limit beyond which technology is not useful for theatre. So this I see as a dilemma between the funded theatre of drama schools and the corporate theatres, corporate funded theatres, which are out to commodify theatre, between the Shila and Charybdis of these theatre has to steer clear. And I suppose this is also the dilemma in other parts of Asia. Thank you.